What I am against is uninformed choice. So I think what we need to do is give women the information that they need to be, and then they can make the choices that are right for them.
Hi, and welcome back to the Turning 30 podcast, a place where we talk about what it's really like to be in your 30s. I'm your host, life coach Emma Wilson, and I'm here to help you feel better, get unstuck, and be more confident in your 30s. I think that this is such an important episode in terms of education, in terms of opening up topics and speaking about things that for most of us we feel are maybe only relevant at certain pockets in our life or certain time periods, and also maybe a little bit taboo to say certain things out loud. And me and my guest, Amanda, we really don't hold back in sharing in this episode. And I think that the topic of fertility, taking control of your fertility, and also general health and education around this topic and being in your 30s and thinking about having children and the changes that you can make to your lifestyle, all of these things, they maybe seem a little bit less glamorous in terms of podcast episodes to listen to. I know if you're listening to this and it is of interest to you and you've pressed play, but I really urge all of you who are thinking, oh, maybe this episode isn't for me because I'm not even sure if I want children, or it's not relevant for me right now, I'll come back to it in the future, or maybe you know for sure that you don't want to have kids. This isn't a conversation just about trying to conceive. It's so much more than that. It's about informed choices. It's about taking control of your habits and health. And it's about how hormones and period health has such an impact on so many different areas of your life, not just your fertility. And also, in addition to that, we are speaking about the famous or the infamous fertility cliff. And for those of you who have been in my community for a long time, you will know I feel very strongly about talking about this data and to help women to let go of fear-mongering and fear of becoming less fertile in your 30s, specifically around the age of 35. This episode is a special one. And if you listen to it and you like it and you feel that you want more people to know this message and want more people to understand what we're talking about, please, of course, share the episode, but also if you could rate and review whatever you're listening to the podcast, leave a comment. Basically, the more engagement that I get on the podcast, and the more ratings, the more we hit the charts, and we basically can reach more listeners. And really specifically for this topic, I feel like awareness is just such an important piece. I also want to share some exciting news that at the end of this week, the doors to the Turning membership, my brand new community, are reopening after 1 month with the founding members. We've had such a great time getting to know each other in there. We had an amazing Q&A session a couple of weeks ago, and now the doors are reopening. This community is not like any other that I have personally found online, and I've done a lot of research, and I also was looking for this so much when I was single in my 30s, feeling lonely, feeling confused about my career, even when I was in a relationship and I was looking for advice but couldn't share anything with my friends because everyone knew my ex. All of those situations that you're in where you just feel alone and you need support. This is what we're doing in the community. We're a group of women in our 30s who are not scared to say the hard things and actually do the work on ourselves. And I'm really excited to welcome in another group of women. The doors will be open for the whole of March, and then they will close again until the next launch. And there's so much goodness. I'm not going to take too much time because I want us to already dive into this episode, but I will say that there is a link in the show notes for the landing page where you can go and have a look at what's included. Just to really quickly take your time, in summary, I'll say two things. Firstly, it's for those of you who are interested in coaching and you want it to be accessible, because getting a one-on-one coach is really expensive and not everybody has the privilege of being able to afford hundreds of pounds, thousands of dollars to invest in therapy and to invest in a private coach. But what I'm offering in the community is coaching, access to my courses, access to me and other women who are also supporting each other. And we will be doing live coaching once a month, loads of other resources. I could keep talking about it for ages. But the second thing I wanted to mention is that each month we focus on a specific topic. And very apt, this month of March, we're diving into fertility. So we're talking a lot about trying to break the stigma of fertility in your 30s, and also talking about fertility awareness and knowledge and how to take control and lifestyle choices and all of the things. Again, relevant for if you want children or you're questioning, or even if you don't, just to have that support and have those important conversations. So if you would like to be part of my community, I really personally invite you to come and join us when the doors reopen this Friday. One last thing that I will say before I introduce the guest is that you will hear in the podcast that we are talking about things such as the contraceptive pill and choices around contraception. And I just want to give a disclaimer that we are not bashing the pill, and the contraceptive pill is a choice. And what we're really talking about, and I do share a personal story of how when I came off the pill, I noticed a big change. That was just what was right for me. And each of us is on our own journey with contraceptive choices, with fertility in general, and with the way that we feel and the hormones in our body. So I really wanted to just add that before we dive into the episode, that when I listened back, I was aware that it might come across of trying to convince or persuade about the pill. And these things aren't black or white. And as Amanda says in the podcast episode, it's all about informed choices and being educated and educating ourselves. And I really hope that's what this podcast can help you do, by just sharing the information that you can then go and dive more deeply into, and hopefully have these conversations more in the community, and obviously also with friends, but specifically with other women who are also in their 30s who are experiencing these issues and also asking these big questions. So now it's time for me to introduce my guest. Amanda is a fertility coach. So she's a women's hormonal health practitioner, a womb yoga teacher, and she's the founder of Fertility Rising. As you'll hear in the episode, she's really passionate about empowering women to feel calm and confident about their menstrual cycle and fertility. Through a gentle blend of scientific fertility awareness education and embodied holistic wisdom, she provides a nurturing space where you can let go of any of the stress and uncertainty around fertility and help you to tune into your body to restore trust in your cycle. If you like the episode, I would love to hear from you. And without further ado, let's dive straight in. Hello, Amanda.
Hi, Emma. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you here. I think most of my audience know that this is a topic that is very close to my heart and something I speak a lot about, fertility in your 30s. And I'm really excited that we're finally getting the chance to sit down and I guess ask all the big fertility questions.
I'm really excited. I feel really passionate about this topic, obviously, because that's what I spend most of my time doing and talking about. And I feel really strongly about supporting women, particularly sort of in that juncture of turning 30 and all the big decisions that come around it, and all of the basically scaremongering is what I'd say that comes around fertility and that time of your life.
Yeah, and I think this is the topic that we're going to focus on most today, is the 35 fertility cliff and the fear. And I know it's something you speak a lot about in your content. But before we do that, it would be really nice just to hear a little bit about how you arrived at this work and what led you to this niche.
So it was very much born out of my own experience. Like most of us, I was put on the pill quite young, and the pill shuts down your cycle. But when you're prescribed it, you're not told that's what it does. Like most people, I thought I was continuing to ovulate, etc., and things like that. But for me, I had a really awful experience on the pill. I suffered from depression, anxiety, couldn't get out of bed most days. It was a real negative impact on my life. And then when I came off of it, I did a lot of research into alternative ways of sort of, understanding my fertility a bit better. And that's when I really dug deep and found out a lot of information that we just weren't taught. Things like you're not fertile every single day of the cycle. You can't just get pregnant at the drop of the hat, even though you were brought up to be afraid of getting pregnant at the drop of the hat. And then once you get into your 30s, a lot of the women around you start to share stories about how it's actually quite difficult as well. It was really born out of that experience and my own journey. I'm a mum. I became a mum in my 30s, and it was very much, I was in that headspace of waiting for the right time to have a baby. I had fortunately met my partner, but there are all the other bits that come along with it, right? So I was going for a promotion at work. I was still renting. I didn't own a place. All of the things that you're meant to have checked the box for by the time of 30, I hadn't yet done. So I was like, felt that certain level of pressure. But what was really a saving grace for me was knowing my cycle. And that helped me feel really at ease about sort of making sure that when I was choosing to become a mother, it wasn't because I felt pressured to, because I felt that there was some sort of ticking clock behind me. I had this sort of connection with my cycle. I really understood it. And that helped me feel really calm and confident about following my own timeline, even though that timeline wasn't necessarily society's timeline and the pressure that gets put on us when we come to that part of our life. So I really thread that into my work. And that's what I'm really passionate about helping women feel, is that connection to the cycle, which gives them that confidence around their fertility so that they can follow the timelines that are right for them.
Do you find that most women, and maybe you know this from the women that you work with or speak to in your community, that they aren't, or we aren't, aware of our cycle up until the point where either A, you're thinking about trying to have a baby, or B, something happens. For example, like a diagnosis of something, or like you mentioned, going off the pill, or maybe, something else that would affect it. Because in my experience, especially in my 20s, I would say, I think I did become more aware of my fertility once I turned 30. But up until that age, up until 29, I think I knew nothing. I would say I was very ignorant about anything to do with this.
I think that is the case for like 99.9% of the women that I work with. Sadly, we're just not given this knowledge when we should be. We're not taught it. We're not taught to understand our bodies. We're not taught to learn how they work. In fact, most of the education we have is around fearing your body. When you're in your teens and your 20s, like, don't get pregnant because you will mess up your life. It's basically the message that we're given. And so a lot of women just aren't aware about it until they reach a point where they are either coming into that 30 or 30, heading towards 35, and they think they might want to have children, like children are what they've seen for themselves. It might not be right now, but that's something that is definitely on the cards. And then it's often when they come off the pill and then they find that there might actually be some issues, that then they start to dig into that and become aware of it. And the thing that I like to remind women of is that sadly, those issues aren't issues that sort of come out of nowhere. They've been there the whole time, because often we're put on sort of the pill to regulate periods. If you have irregular periods or suspected PCOS or endometriosis, the treatment that is given generally is the pill. That doesn't cure the problem. It just means that it's lying dormant. And then when you come off it, perhaps because you want to start to have a baby, then those problems really start to shine through.
It's really hard for me to talk about the pill and everything, because I made a very conscious decision at the age of 29, actually, as I led up to my 30th birthday. It was when I had my turning 30 awakening and started getting really into this work and coaching and therapy and everything. I decided to come off the pill because I must have read something or heard something that created this perception for me. But I realized that a lot of my mental health and my moods were being affected by my hormones. And I stopped taking the pill, and I haven't taken the pill since. And that was almost 9 years ago now. And I noticed a huge difference. And I do have to say that I would never go back on the pill again. And I almost was angry at myself at the time. I remember when I came off it, I had been on the pill for all of my 20s, and from the age of 17, when I first started needing or wanting contraception. And it wasn't to regulate periods, it was for contraceptive purposes. And then it was one of those things where it was like, if it's not broken, don't fix it. It was working fine for me, and it just kept taking it. And in retrospect, when I came off and I felt like I lifted out of a cloud almost, I realized how the hormones had been affecting me. But I started to say that because for 9 years, I've not really done any research about the pill, or I don't really know anything about it. And the majority of my friends who are my age aren't on the pill. I don't know if that's just who I surround myself with. People just have more holistic choices or alternative methods of contraception. Is the pill still as popular today? Or do you find that women in their 20s or teens, maybe that's their choice, but 30s and beyond, we're choosing something different?
That's a good question. It is still extremely popular, if that's the right word to use. And I think one of the main reasons is because it's the sort of, when you go to the GP, it's the first thing that's offered, right? It's whether you are looking for contraception, whether you're looking for an issue with your cycle, it's often the first thing that's offered. And that really touched me when you say that you were angry at yourself, because I think you had absolutely no reason to be angry at yourself for going on it, because I'm pretty sure nobody told you what the impact of the pill was. Nobody explained to you how it actually works, what it does to your natural hormones. Nobody explained to you what your alternatives are. I teach a fertility awareness method, which is an alternative method of contraception. It's natural contraception, but it's not really talked about in medical communities, mainly because it's not part of their training. So it's not really, the image they have of it is a very old-fashioned image, whereas it is actually a practice that is based in science and actually effective, but they just have not received the training on it. And when it comes to that sort of age question as well, I think more and more I'm finding perhaps, and it's probably because of the circle that I find myself in, what I do, a lot of the women that I work with, a lot of them have chosen not to take the pill, mainly because they have more information about it, mainly because they're in that period of life where they are more in touch with themselves, they're knowing themselves better. Perhaps they are asking more questions about sort of what is in line with who they are and how they want to live and what isn't. And I think that comes later in life, and I'm sure that's something that happens with the women that you work with as well as they journey through their 30s, is that self-knowledge and making those choices that are right for you. It is part of that journey as well.
Totally. And I don't want this to become like a Western medicine bashing session, but a story came into my mind actually when you were just talking about when the doctors don't have the knowledge. And I'm thinking, is it knowledge, or is it that they genuinely believe that this is the best or the most effective type of contraception, or the most safe? Because I have a crazy story, and it's almost like a repressed memory that just popped into my head of, I think I was around 32, it must have been 32. And I went to the doctor, to the gynecologist actually, and she asked me what I was doing for contraception because I was in a relationship at that time. And I told her I was doing the temperature tracking. I'm not sure if that's what your fertility awareness method entails.
It's part of it, yeah.
Yeah. So I was doing the natural cycles at the time. And she looked at me and she said, I'll give you a prescription for folic acid then, because you'll be having a baby in a few months. Word for word, said that to me. And I remember being so annoyed because I was like, how dare you? It was the way that she said it. Wasn't like, let me sit and explain to you something. It was basically very passively saying, this is absolutely not going to work. You're going to get pregnant. So I didn't, spoiler alert, I didn't get pregnant at that time. And it did work, the natural cycles. Yeah, it was very eye-opening to think that this was a very esteemed doctor who was really shunning me and pretty much saying, you're running a huge risk. Mm-hmm. It's crazy to think that this is what young women are being exposed to.
Mm-hmm. That's such a belittling reaction, isn't it? It's like, you're a bit of an idiot. Like, you're there. Yeah, no, I'm not actually. I've made a decision that's right for me. And if you have alternative views on that, let's talk about it like adults, rather than, I can't believe that person would have said that to you. I'm so sorry that you went through that. On the point of Western medicine, what I want to emphasize is that I'm not anti-pill. I'm not anti-Western medicine. I'm the daughter of a doctor and a nurse. So I very much have grown up in that milieu. But what I am against is uninformed choice. So I think what we need to do is give women the information that they need to be, and then they can make the choices that are right for them. And natural fertility methods like fertility awareness, and we can come back to natural cycles. I have a lot to say about natural cycles, but natural fertility methods are not for everybody. Some people might take the pill, they'll be very happy on the pill, and that works for them. That's great. What needs to be better talked about is women who are making different decisions, women who want alternatives, whether that is through they've just moved on to another part of their life and there's a different decision they want to make, or they're having issues. And when it comes to the view around it, I think in part it is training. I think in part it is also like time, the amount of time that these doctors have with patients. If you go and see your GP, like you literally have to have verbal diarrhea to get everything out in like the space of 2 minutes that you need to say. And these are kinds of things that need more in-depth conversation. So when I work with women, I work with them for a minimum of 3 months when I'm teaching them how to understand their fertility. And we work on a very in-depth one-to-one basis, because we need to take the time to understand what that woman's goals are and where she's coming from. And with regards to the general view, I think it is, unfortunately, sort of methods I think it is also a bit tied into the bigger economic story, right, of the influence of pharmaceutical companies and things like that. So I remember, I'll give you a very short anecdote, but I remember as a child, because my dad is a doctor, most of my stationery didn't come from WH Smith's. Most of it came from drug companies that gave my dad free stationery. So I was walking around with, like, you know, antipsychotics written on my pens when I was at school, right? They have a lot of power, right? And so they provide a lot for the doctors. They do a lot of trainings and things like that. Whereas natural fertility, it's not a massive lobby, right? Yeah. So I think that comes into it as well, without wanting to go down the route of conspiracy and all that kind of stuff. But I think it is important to recognize that. And even myself, so for example, I went to the doctor last week and he asked me what I was doing for contraception. I told him I'm using the symptothermal method, fertility awareness. And he made a similar remark. He's like, well, you need something that's actually going to work, otherwise you're going to fall pregnant. And I'm like, well, I actually teach it and I've been using it.
You're like, this is my method.
Like, exactly. I've been using this since 2015 and I've not had an unintended pregnancy. So I think I'm okay.
And the reaction was in agreement?
Was still, well, yeah, wow. But you probably need to think about it.
But wow, so interesting. Yeah, and I just before we move on, and I think I should have introduced this at the start. Anybody listening who is on the pill and who, exactly like you said, who has made an informed choice, does not to say that the pill is all bad. And I didn't want any of my story of me leaving that behind to be a reflection that I think that's like the only choice. I really don't think it's black and white. And I know for many women, the pill is an amazing option, especially for women who have endometriosis or any health issues, that really the pill is a saving grace. I know I do have friends that have that. So I just really wanted to make that clear, that this isn't like a contraception bashing session at all, but it's just definitely wanted to open that conversation and obviously talk about what you bring to the table in terms of the fertility awareness method. Would you like to share a little bit about what the method is and what it entails, just for anybody who is interested in learning about it?
Yeah, absolutely. The term fertility awareness method is an umbrella term, and underneath that are lots and lots of different methods for natural fertility management. And the one I teach is called the symptothermal method. And it's called that because we look at symptoms and signs our body sends, and thermal, the thermometer thing. So we track our basal body temperature and we look at cervical mucus, and we learn how to interpret the two together to give us a really robust method for knowing when we're fertile and when we're not. And it's also really useful for us to know whether we're ovulating regularly, because ovulation is really important for general health. So even if you're not wanting to have a baby, some of the hormones that we produce thanks to ovulation are really important for other processes in the body, like heart health, brain health, bone health, etc. And it also allows us to check any underlying hormonal issues. So from the information that we gather by tracking our cycle, we can uncover underlying things like if you're not making enough estrogen or progesterone, if there might be an underlying thyroid condition, and things like that. And when it comes to its efficacy for contraception, when you learn it with an instructor, because the instructor follows you and really supports you, it has an efficacy rate of 98.2% effective with typical use. So that's when you have been able to learn it with an instructor. And the main benefit of it is that there are no side effects. And that's the thing I love about it. And it's also extremely empowering because you aren't relying on an external source to understand your fertility and to manage it. You're doing it yourself. It's completely self-reliant. And if you're in a relationship with someone, it involves your partner as well. So it really emphasizes the fact that managing fertility is not just the woman's responsibility. The man is as responsible as the woman as well. And some women come to it through apps, and I can talk a bit about that if that you'd like me to. But so apps are useful in terms of democratizing it and making it more available and making people more aware of it. Where they fall down, though, is that using an app is not an actual method. And unfortunately, I know of lots of women who've had unintended pregnancies with natural cycles. And the reason for that is because you're using just one biomarker to determine your fertility plus an algorithm. So that one biomarker, if we were to use it alone, requires much stricter rules than if we're using it in conjunction with other symptoms like cervical mucus or the position of your cervix. And the other thing that I have a bit of a bugbear about is that a lot of these algorithms claim to be able to predict ovulation. But ovulation is like a sensitive beast, as it were. If you say you get sick, you have a fever, or you take medication, or you travel. Exactly.
I always have different periods.
Exactly. It's sensitive to those kinds of changes, which an algorithm can't really take into account, because we're people, we have lives, we're not robots. And sometimes it will miss that. And that's how a lot of these unintended pregnancies happen. And then the last thing about that I find a bit questionable, and some women may find it questionable, some won't, is just the data. Who owns that data? Where does it go? Often you'll find that you're then targeted in terms of marketing with certain products when you then if you turn your intentions to try and conceive and you're marketed with all sorts of like baby stuff, next time you go on Instagram, I wonder where that's come from, kind of thing. So yeah, that's my...
Wow. Yeah, it's a bit Black Mirror when you put it like that. I hadn't really thought about it. I think that the biggest benefit is, like you said, firstly, it's free of charge, which is also nice. The actual method itself is not I know that you pay for the instruction up front at the start, but then once you've done it, presumably you don't have to do it again. It's yours, yeah. And also then the side effects on your body, that's a huge benefit, that you don't actually have to put anything in your body or have an invasive procedure. I know a lot of women opt for the IUD, the hormonal or non-hormonal one. It kind of all sounds a bit like too good to be true. What do you usually find that the drawbacks are of it?
Yeah, there are drawbacks, and that's why I say it's not for everyone. So if you're using it as contraception, you need to be making sure that you're taking your temperature every morning around the same time. So that's one drawback. If you're someone who isn't able to have that consistency, you might find that challenging, although there are devices out there that can help you get around that. There is a learning curve to it. It takes about 3 cycles, I'd say, before you start to get into the habit and get comfortable with it. And some people want something that's pretty immediate. They don't want to put in that time, and therefore that's not for them. So that's definitely a drawback for some women. And the other is also the fertile window itself. So when you've identified your fertile window, you then have choices as to how you manage your fertility that way. So if you're wanting to avoid pregnancy, you need to get creative in the bedroom, or you use a condom, and not everybody wants to use a condom. And for some, that might be a bit of a challenge, particularly because our bodies have evolved to aim for baby making. So when we have the highest libido is in that fertile window, because estrogen is high, testosterone is high, you want to go for it. And for some, that might be a bit too challenging to manage as well. But I think the trade-offs for me personally are that connection that I have with my body, with myself, that knowing. I find it extremely empowering to be able to know every month I'm ovulating, the status of my fertility, to not have to worry whether I'm infertile or not. And like, I'm 35 going on 36, and I hope to have more children, but I'm feeling pretty calm about it because I have this tool in place and other systems in place that enable me that peace of mind, that I'm not worrying about the what ifs and maybes because I have the data right there.
Yeah. And you mentioned you've been doing this tracking for years. So when you did decide that the time was right to have a baby, I presume that you were very much in knowledge of your body. And how did that pan out with if it's okay to ask, with conceiving?
Yeah, it was extremely helpful. I'll take you through it a little bit because I think it's quite important to share this as well, because, you've mentioned in the past about how wonderful it is that we're talking more about the challenges that we might encounter when it comes to conceiving. And I think that's a brilliant thing because it means women are not struggling on their own. It really encourages women who are struggling to come forward and get help. And I think that is an incredibly powerful thing. However, some of the women I've worked with have come to me because they've thought, I'm 34, I'm 35, it's going to be hard. I'm really worried because everybody's finding it difficult. So I think it's also important to share stories like you shared about your own journey, and I'm going to share mine as well, that isn't necessarily how it has to be. So I was tracking my cycle for many years beforehand, and I saw that a part of my cycle was basically I wasn't making enough progesterone. My ovulation wasn't good enough quality. And I knew, looking at my cycle, that if we were to try for a baby at that point, it probably would not happen. We would struggle. And so what I did was I was able to make tweaks to my lifestyle and to what I was eating, sleep, basic self-care, and things that I knew would support hormone production and would support progesterone production, so that I could make sure that I was therefore producing more progesterone. And that part of my cycle then moved into the healthy zone for being able to conceive. And so once that was there, and I also did blood tests with my GP on the side as well to make sure that I didn't have any deficiencies, which I did. So I took targeted supplementation to resolve those. And I also worked on sort of the mental, emotional side of things. So I'm also a yoga teacher. And I think that the sort of mind-body connection is really important. So I worked on that as well. And so I had this sort of journey of about 6 months or so of working on this, being aware and thinking, okay, we're going to want to conceive at some point soon. We hadn't set a date or anything like that, but I knew it was in the picture. And then when we were like, okay, let's go for it, I then inversed the rules that I'd be using to prevent pregnancy. And then I conceived on the first go, and my child is now 3.5 years old. So it was a very smooth journey. And I share that background to show that A, you have a lot more agency and a lot more control over your fertility than you're led to believe. And B, that it can be a smooth journey for you as well.
I couldn't agree more about the importance of speaking about what you're talking about out loud. I think it's incredible. I'm sure you've heard me speak about this before, maybe in Instagram or on the podcast, but I think it's incredible how many women, there's now such a safe space to share about fertility loss and fertility struggles. I think it's something that's really become a lot more common over the past 5 years, that, because of Instagram, because of how vulnerability is held so highly, and it's given women such a safe space to talk about loss and grief and collective support within that. And I think it's amazing. But I actually think the pendulum has swung so far the other way, that women who have success stories or who did get pregnant easily, because of fear of upsetting women who have struggled. I'm sure I haven't personally gone through this, but I have worked with clients and I have lots of friends who have, that going on a fertility journey that is taking much longer, or is a struggle, or coming up with lots of obstacles, seeing somebody talk online about how easy it was, or even their friends saying, oh, it worked for us the first time, is very triggering. If anyone's listening and is going through that, it's really important to recognize and validate how hard that is to hear other people's journeys. But I think the pendulum has swung so far the other direction that actually it's almost upped this fear of the bad stuff. And I really see that because, and I see it as well, and I speak a lot about how when I became single at 33, I just had all of these stories in my mind. It was almost, I remember I got a bit down the rabbit hole with looking at Instagrams of women who were talking about, okay, I'm 35 and I can't get pregnant, and I'm looking at adoption, surrogacy and all these things. And it genuinely fed into an existing narrative that this it might not happen. And the huge thing that happened for me during those years of being single was expanding my mind to the fact that it might not be hard. And it's something that is really hard to find. And the only reason that I actually managed to find that evidence was because I went on this trip to a different part of the world where, I guess, the lifestyle, it was in Costa Rica, and the lifestyle of a lot of the women who I was coming across just had meant that they had started trying for babies at 38, 39, even 40 plus. So all of a sudden I met 4 or 5 women in separate occasions over that trip who had all got pregnant successfully without having fertility treatments. And I was like, oh, but still, I do want to share that even though I was almost like collecting all of this data and this to expand my mind to the fact that it might not be so hard, and I was sharing about it and publicizing it and promoting about the fertility cliff, which we'll speak about now, I still had that voice in my head, like, because I wasn't a mum yet. But what I remember, I used to post stuff, and then afterwards I'd almost have a vulnerability hangover of, oh my God, what if I'm the poster girl for saying there's no fertility cliff, and then it's going to take me however long to get pregnant, or I can't have babies. It was definitely even more proof of just how ingrained that fear is, and how we just are bombarded with messaging of time running out, and we're bombarded now, I think, with negative stories instead of positive ones.
I totally agree. And I think that it's that mental piece, isn't it, that's really challenging. And I didn't waltz into it thinking I'm just going to do X, Y, and Z, and it's going to be great, woohoo, and that kind of thing. Like, I remember having a conversation with my husband, because the women in my family who had been on 10-year fertility journeys of multiple fertility treatments in order to have children. And I'd seen how difficult that was firsthand. And I'd said to my husband, I was like, if we need fertility treatment, I don't want to do it. I just know I can't go through what they've been through. Wow. So I was coming from that mindset as well. These are women in my family, women I'm close to, I've seen really struggle. And then when I managed to get pregnant smoothly, because I knew what I needed to address in my cycle that would have prevented me from being able to get pregnant, it was like something clicked. And I was like, hang on a sec. I have all these preconceived ideas about fertility, 30s, how difficult it's going to be, how it's almost potluck, how it's almost, I have no agency, I have no control over over this situation. And yes, there are aspects we definitely cannot control, but there's so much to fertility that is impacted by the things that we do every day, how we live our lives, the impact that we can influence as well. But we're not told that. Instead, it's sort of a lot of the more frightening stories that make you feel, God, time is running out. I need to get a move on. And God forbid, if like you haven't found the right partner yet and you know that you want to have a family, the pressure then just becomes unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Do you ever, I'm saying this projecting my own experience of speaking out online, but do you ever get people saying to you that you have an irresponsible message? I'm saying that because whenever I post anything that talks against the fertility cliff or saying that fertility is much more complex than age, that there's so many different moving parts, I almost always get at least one, if not more, messages, comments, or messages in my DMs saying you're really irresponsible, that, you know, you're giving women false hope, that in their 30s, women, it's biological scientific fact that fertility decreases and this message is dangerous. And I always read it and have this kind of feeling of deep shame that maybe I am creating problems for some women. And then I have to remind myself that I don't actually believe that to be true. I think that fertility is a lot of different moving pieces, and you can have fertility issues at 21 and you could be very fertile at 45 and vice versa. And I try to remind myself that the message is actually helping people to free their mind and to be less stressed, which actually helps. But I do wonder if you ever get any pushback, and if yes, how you deal with that.
So it's a difficult one because I think it's so important. The message that you're sharing is definitely helping women to move, to see a different perspective, because I think we can end up in a bit of an echo chamber. And then I often find when people come at me with those negative comments or criticisms, I always try and approach it with a bit of compassion. Like, where is that person? Are they perhaps going through a bit of a struggle right now? And that's why this is really triggering for them. And rather than sort of enter into the debate, just try and approach it with a bit of compassion, but also stay steadfast in what I am sharing, because there is data to back up what we're talking about. For example, when it comes to where the fertility cliff came from, the idea of the fertility cliff at 35, it's not completely, in part, it comes from Paris church records of the 1700s in France, right? So these were people who used this to come up with a statistic of how likely it was for women to get pregnant after a certain age. But what is the context of that? There's no way of knowing if those women who were, older were not actually actively trying to have children anymore. In the 1700s, women were having children a lot earlier. So were women having children late into their 30s? Probably a lot less. And also, when it comes to using that to create a statistic, you have no idea about the intention of women. Did they actually want to conceive versus the ability to conceive? And we've amalgamated that into one thing. And I think it's being able to push back against that and challenge that and question that is so important. And I think we have a role to continue doing that and to continue offering an alternative evidence-based perspective.
I think this evidence is complete bullshit. It's crazy to me that it's still quoted, that the fertility cliff is still a thing. I can't believe it, because everything you're saying is really valid. But if you actually think about, there's a study in the 17th century, think about how different life is now in 2025. Like our lifestyles, our everything, our average age of marriage, our average age of starting to try for a baby, our health, all the different things, and also our options if we can't conceive. But anyway, I feel like I can really strongly say that my research into this area, which I did research, I'm one of those people, when I decided to freeze my eggs just before I was 35, I started talking about it when I was 33. I went deep into a research project to get all the data and collect everything and understand. And that was only then, because I just happened to be that kind of person who has to research every little thing, did I understand how incorrect the messaging is. Now, all of that to say, it doesn't mean that our fertility is not declining in our 30s, because I think that is really important. And I've had some people on a podcast, and like another doctor, a fertility doctor, explain to me that it's actually more around 39, 40 where they actually see a significant drop.
Yeah.
So it's not to say that everyone needs to just think, oh, it's okay, all okay, and fertility stays the same. It doesn't. And we do need to recognize that, I think. And women shouldn't be in denial that their fertility is decreasing as time goes by. But I cannot tell you how many women I work with, and also for myself, that my 35th birthday was filled with dread. I was single. Didn't have anything on the horizon about having a baby. I, at the time, was far away from thinking of becoming a mother solo. I didn't even know if I necessarily 100% wanted children. I just wanted to have that option. And that 35th birthday was like, whoa. I remember the months before feeling so confronted, even though I had all the data and the facts. So I think that really shows me how the marketing and that study, how ingrained it is in society, and how no matter what, I feel like even though women are getting more educated and knowledgeable, it's still there. It's 35 is still the birthday that triggers women.
Yeah. And I think those societal norms are really difficult to change, and they take a really long time to change. And I think what you were saying before as well is you get this idea that, a bit like Cinderella and the pumpkin at midnight, that when you turn 35, your ovaries shut down and pack up and leave. And if you haven't had a baby by then, it's too late. What were you waiting for, kind of thing? And we definitely still have that image. But as you say, it doesn't work like that. Yes, it does decline. But what I'm really, really passionate about saying is there is no 35th birthday memo. It's not a cliff. Your ovaries don't fall off a cliff. It's a continuum. It does start to decline, as you were saying, a previous guest had said, around sort of 38, 39, 40s. That's when you start to see that. But it's also important to think about the rate of decline. So all of our eggs are going to decline in quality, but the speed at which they decline, we have a role to play in that. And the speed of decline varies from woman to woman. As you were saying before, age is not the only factor. Lifestyle plays a huge role in terms of the rate of egg quality and quantity decline. And when it comes to fertility issues that you might encounter, I always think it's really important to recognize that fertility issues that come up in your 30s are often things that were there underlying, but you were not aware about. Irregular periods, PCOS, for example, that doesn't spring up overnight. That starts in your teens. That starts when you start getting your period, but it's been lying dormant and it hasn't been managed perhaps in the right way, which then means it becomes an issue because there's a huge amount of hormonal imbalance that is going to make getting pregnant harder. And even things like endometriosis, it takes on average 7.5 years to get an endometriosis diagnosis. So when it comes to women's health, women's fertility, there are a lot of things that need to change before this narrative of we're going to put you on the shelf at 35 because you no longer serve a purpose or you have no longer have any value is put to bed. And you can see it as when we start to talk about perimenopause and how perimenopausal women and menopausal women feel like they're completely ostracized from society because they're no longer in their fertile years. They no longer have any value.
Oh, and it just really gets my back up about the 35 thing. Like I'm just like noticing my body's I'm getting all stressed when I'm talking about it, because what annoys me the most is men's opinions of it when it comes to dating and the apps. That 35 is the cutoff, I'll change the age. And that's another thing that I hear a lot of. And I also remember having these fears of being single at that age, thinking, I remember being like, oh, there's not going to be 34 on my profile anymore. And men change the age because they want women who, if they want to have kids. And it's a real fear, because I think there is definitely more education now for women, and I hope that our messages are being spread far and wide. If you're listening to this podcast, please share it. I think it's probably men wouldn't get the memo, and it's frustrating. It really is. Like, what can we do about it?
Yeah,
I just think it's really difficult, and it's not really necessarily a question that you can open up with a single man. If you're a woman single going on a date, you're 35, 36, however old, you're not going to sit down and be like, by the way, I've been doing the fertility awareness method and I'm actually really in sync with my hormones.
Date number 2.
Don't worry. Yeah. Don't worry. I am going to be able to bear a child. It's like, we can't say that. And it's just, it's hard.
Yeah. And it's not like their sperm stays super sperm for their whole life either, right? Like they have a decline. Yeah, they have a decline too. And when it comes to men's fertility, men's sperm quality, that's also impacted by environmental factors and lifestyle factors. When it comes to looking after and almost future-proofing your fertility as well, it's not just down to the woman, it's down to the man as well. And 50%, I think it's over 50% is male factor. So sperm quality, sperm quantity, that kind of stuff comes into it.
This is a really random diversion, but I do want to just ask you if you've seen it and if you have an opinion on it. But I keep seeing this reel come up on Instagram of a man saying that there's a recent study out that quality of sperm and health of the male affects the female's pregnancy. And so it's basically, if you're trying to get pregnant, that the men should start to basically take more care of themselves.
Massively.
Do you know anything about this?
Oh, yeah. A lot of the women that I work with, like, support them to put in place a protocol for their partner as well to improve sperm quality so that they are sort of in tip-top shape. Because so like fertility, sperm quality and sperm and male fertility has little bearing under the age of 35, and it does decline slightly thereafter. The quality of the sperm is responsible for things like the rate of miscarriage. If the father is over 40, the rate of miscarriage is going to be higher. And it's also responsible, studies have shown, for the severity of morning sickness once you are pregnant.
This is what I was thinking. I saw the reels about.
Exactly. And because the male factor is really important in the building of the placenta as well. So if you think about the importance of the placenta for your baby's first 9 months of life, sperm that is not optimal can have a bearing in terms of other issues that arise in pregnancy for the woman and the baby as a result, because it has such an important role in the building of the placenta.
I'm wondering how far and wide this message is going to be spread to men, or whether this is just going to be a few reels that have obviously caught my attention, but probably nothing will change. It's so interesting. But I do want to just circle back around to what you just said about the lifestyle changes, and also how the fertility is declining, but the rate can be different for different people. And I guess the message that I want to understand is that what we can do, you already mentioned a few things that you did when you were on your conception journey, but I wanted to share something that happened to me as well, which I think is really apt here for this conversation, that I did my hormone level checks when I was 33 and a half, I would say, when I first thought about egg freezing. So I went to do the fertility MOT, the hormone profile, and I got the set of hormones and everything looked normal for a 33-year-old woman. And I decided to delay and not do the egg freezing at that point. And then actually, it must have been about 18 months later when I did again say, okay, I'm going to circle back. They needed to do another set of tests because they were outdated, the hormones, and they wanted to see before they gave me the protocol for the egg freezing. And my fertility had got better. and I thought it was really interesting because it was like I was 33 and a half and then I was 35. And it was like the FSH levels, the LH levels, if you're listening and you don't know what those are, these are all key hormones for when you're trying to look at your fertility. And I was shocked. And I said to the doctor, but I've been told that my fertility is supposed to be decreasing. I've just turned 35. And he said, oh no, you're not a robot. Your body has fluctuations, almost always also could depend on the day. It can depend on lots of different things. And then I look back now and I'm like, I just became aware of my lifestyle during that time. And I started to listen to podcasts like what you can eat to increase fertility and egg quality and all those things. I didn't do a specific diet, I have to be honest, but I think in general, I was more dedicated to yoga. I was in my post-breakup glow up, and I was more into journaling, self-care, living alone, not having stress of a partner, all these things. And I think that's also, I can say now, probably what contributed to it. So I think it's really interesting to open that question and say, okay, what can we do to increase fertility?
That's so interesting, isn't it? And that just goes to show how much lifestyle can influence fertility. And I think that's a really important message. So there are sort of 3 main actions, and I'll break it down into 3 because I think it's depending on who's listening, they can pick which one most resonates for them. So the first thing that I would say is get to know your cycle now. Because if you want to be able to rely on your fertility in future, you need to know what's going on now. And this, you can learn to track your cycle, or you can just start with something very simple. So start by noting the dates of your cycle, the lengths, the flow, any symptoms that you have, mood, that kind of stuff. And if you want to go a bit further so that you can know whether you're ovulating regularly or not, then you can learn a symptothermal method with an instructor or through a book or whatever works for you. As I said, ovulation is really important for our general health, not just making babies. And linked to that is the second action, which I would say is to aim for blood sugar balance. And the reason I say that is if you think about our hormones, we have our sex hormones. And if we think about a hierarchy, there are 2 that are at the very top of our entire system that have a massive influence on the rest of our other body systems, including our reproductive system. Number 1 is insulin. So if we can make sure that we're aiming for blood sugar balance, that will help that cascade and sort of help manage the impact that has on the rest of our body and the rest of our systems. And what does that mean? That means aiming for balanced meals and snacks throughout the day. So making sure that every meal that you have has a mix of healthy fats, protein, and carbohydrates. A lot of the women I work with, one of the first things I do is add in more fat into what they're eating, because I think we grew up in the diet culture of the 90s and the noughties where it was low fat everything. Everyone wanted to look like Kate Moss. That was the epitome of health. A lot of us sometimes need to have to rewire our view of certain foods and how we eat. So that's a really practical action that you can do, and that has a huge impact. And that isn't about following a specific diet, like you were saying. It's just about being aware of how you're eating throughout the day. And then the third action is that second hormone that's right at the top is cortisol. So it's about managing stress. I don't think it's possible, particularly in your 30s, to eliminate all stress, because it's just completely unrealistic. So what I aim to do is to help women put in place systems that enable them to manage chronic stress while they work on reducing the sources of that stress. So that means making sure that you have a practice in place that you use regularly, whether that is journaling, like you were mentioning, or a breathwork practice, or yoga, or even regularly just walking, in being in nature, that allows you to manage stress. And I call it a practice because you can't just do it once and then hope that it's going to reduce your stress for the rest of the month. It needs to be something that you regularly do. And a lot of these are quite easy to get started with. The struggle is keeping it going and keep going at it and sort of committing to it, making it consistent. So I often recommend doing it with a friend if you can, because that you'll make it more likely to continue doing it, or work with someone that can support you to maintain those habits, and also identify which habits are right for you as well.
Yeah. Wow. I love all of these suggestions, and that the fact there are a different one, so you don't necessarily have to do all of them. You can just choose one to focus on for now. That works.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So before I did this work, I used to work in behavior change. So I'm really hot on making sure that when you are trying to put in place new habits, that you make sure that they are realistic and also sustainable, because otherwise the behavior that you're trying to adopt or change, it's not going to stick. Mm-hmm. So making sure that, okay, you just pick one, you make it as simple as possible, and you remove any barriers to that, and you keep going. And also making sure that you don't have that mindset of, oh, I've missed 2 days of my practice, I have to start all over again. It's not. It's a case of getting back on the horse and keeping going, and knowing that what you've done so far has already helped.
Totally. I just really love this message, and I hope that it is the biggest message that the listeners will take away, of empowerment and being able to change your fertility, or at least come into that awareness and create habits that are going to support your fertility journey. And I think it's so important, because fertility, as we've been taught about, it is something that feels very outside of our control. But when we can actually manage to get back into control with it, or take control of what we can, I think that it's contra to it's the antithesis to the fertility cliff. It's like saying, okay, I acknowledge this, but this is what I could do instead. And for me, taking control of my fertility long before I was even in a position or even had a partner really made a big change in my life. And also was just healthy habits that didn't just support fertility. It supported lots of mental health, lots of other different things. So I love your message. I think it's really important, and thank you for sharing it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Emma. I think you're completely right. All of these things are, when we think about fertility, we can often think, oh, that's not for me because I don't want to have a baby, or I'm not in a position to have a baby right now. But these are actually things that are foundational for good menstrual cycle health, and therefore good overall health. So I really believe that future-proofing of fertility, even if you're not going to have a baby, is also going to serve for a much smoother journey into perimenopause as well. So these are the sort of the habits that you put in place that are going to serve you throughout whatever your journey looks like.
Yeah, and I hope that if you've got this far in the episode, then you are probably somebody who is already convinced about this. But I really hope that women who are in my community, in your community, who will see this podcast episode, will give it a chance to really, even they won't say, oh no, I'm not actually focused on that in my life right now, I'll just listen to something more relevant. Because I think, it's such a game-changing topic. And I would love for you to share with the listeners where they can find out more about you and your work and how to work with you.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you, Emma. So the best place is probably Instagram. You can find me at fertility_rising. And the best way to work with me at the moment is I've actually got a masterclass coming up at the end of this month that is particularly around this topic about future-proofing your fertility. And this is really a support for anyone who is asking themselves these questions, whether or not they want to have a child right now or in the future, but they just want to feel more at ease about their fertility. So that's coming up. So if you follow me on Instagram, you'll get all of the information and details there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I'll see everybody on the podcast.